Good evening everyone. Welcome to Tathastu-ICS. As part of Prelims Aadharshila series, I am taking a series related to history, that is Dandi to Azadi. And as part of that, we have been covering a number of lectures which included from beginning, if we see, to Dandi March, that is Salt Satyagraha. Then after that, Pune Pact we covered, 1935 Act we covered, and in last class we had covered Namaste Sambhavi, good evening Anup, and in last class we had covered about the formation of Congress Ministries. Congress Ministries were formed in 8 provinces. So we had seen till that. टुडे आज हम लोग क्या देखेंगे? टुडे वी विल सी, गुड इवनिंग प्रकाश, गुड इवनिंग मेघा, गुड इवनिंग एवरीवन. सो टुडे वी विल सी द वर्किंग ऑफ द कांग्रेस मिनिस्ट्रीज विच वेर फॉर्म्ड इन 8 प्रोविंसेस. उनकी वर्किंग्स को देखेंगे, व्हाट रिफॉर्म्स दे ब्रॉट, व्हाट वाज द इवैल्यूएशंस ऑफ दैट, क्या क्या उनसे कमी रह गई, व्हाट वेर शॉर्टकमिंग्स ऑफ देयर वर्क. इन एडिशन टू दैट, फ्रॉम ऑफिस एक्सेप्टेंस till resignation. Good evening Kanak, because they finally resigned also in 1939. So we will see also that what were the reasons because of which they resigned in 1939. तो आज के लेक्चर का स्कोप यही है 1937 से 1939 तक. चलिए शुरू करते हैं, लेट्स स्टार्ट. So in 1937 we saw Congress ministries formed in 8 provinces. Congress ministries formed in 8 provinces. Good evening Himanshu. And if we see the working of the Congress ministry now, and all these ministries, they were headed by a premier. At that time there was no post of chief minister. It used to be a premier who used to lead these ministries. Good evening Pramila. So today we will see that these Congress ministries, they got dual responsibility. They got dual role or responsibility. Why dual responsibility? Good evening Munni. So why dual responsibility? Because one responsibility at the provincial level. Province के level पर एक responsibility थी to run the ministries and to work for the people. Whether it is social reform, whether it is labor reform, whether it is peasant reform, whether it is reforms related to social sectors like education, health, these things. So on one hand, the responsibility was related to provincial ministries. Oh, sorry. So on one hand, responsibilities were related to provincial ministries. And under this, what were the responsibility? They were not accepted office for power. They had accepted office for social reforms, peasant or agrarian reform, labor reform, etc. So on one hand, responsibility was there for the reforms at provincial level. Good evening D21, good evening Jasovanta. And if we see, another responsibility before Congress was to play the role of opposition at center, because at center there was British control, so Congress had to play the role of opposition at center, which included the role to prepare masses for next movement. So these were the two roles which came before Congress after office acceptance. We will see how Congress was able to deliver on both the roles, whether it is at the provincial level or it is at the central level. So that was the dual role which came before the Congress. Gandhiji, Gandhiji always used to give the words of wisdom, and as usual he said that these are the crowns of thorns, not the crowns for renown. They have to be held lightly, not tightly. As usual, Gandhiji's words of wisdom: these ministries are to be held lightly, not tightly. They are crowns of thorns. So Gandhiji was very clear that this accepting office, taking over the charge of these provincial ministries, they were going to be a very challenging task. Plus, Congress should not deviate from its primary objective, that is to free India, to liberate India, to fight for the independence. So that's why Gandhiji was saying that you held them lightly, not tightly. So that was another thing associated with this. In addition to this, if we see that what was the immediate impact of Congress assumption of office, if we see, as we saw in case of Congress got responsibilities, but what was its impact on the people? People felt a sense of relief. They felt that a huge burden which was being kept on them, that has been removed. It unleashed huge energy, and that is witnessed in the Kisan Sabha movement. A number of Kisan Sabhas were formed in this period. A number of trade unions were formed in this period. A number of youth organizations, youth movements started in this period. Why? Because they felt a sense of relief and a sense of empowerment that yes, Congress has come to power, and that was a psychological break from the imperial past. So that was its impact on the people. Now let's see the works of Congress ministries. Works of Congress ministries. So if we see the works of the Congress ministries, we can divide them into a number of parts. That is, their works in social field, their works in agrarian reforms, their works related to labor issues, their works in other related to the depressed classes. So we can divide like this the works of Congress ministries. So one category we can take of civil liberties. So Congress was very clear that unlike the Britishers, civil liberties have to be given to the people, and under this Congress took a number of steps which included release of political prisoners. This was one issue. Curb on the powers of police. restrictions on press were removed. Restrictions on press were removed under civil liberties only. As you know, as part of the civil disobedience movement, a number of emergency powers, a number of emergency acts were brought, like Public Safety Act, to crush the civil disobedience movement. So all these emergency powers were withdrawn. Emergency acts were withdrawn. So political prisoners were released, curb on the powers of the police, restrictions on press were removed, emergency powers were withdrawn. So number of steps were taken related to civil liberties. In addition to that, there were a number of bans, like Britishers had banned. Bans were there on whom? On political organization. On political organization there was ban. Then there was ban on journals. On political organization there was ban. On journals there was ban. So what Congress ministries did, what? Lifted these bans. Lifted these bans. So these were the steps which Congress ministries took with respect to civil liberties. All these bans were removed. All these bans were removed. Political books were also banned. So these political books, all these bans were lifted. So this is the reform with respect to civil liberties on which the Congress delivered. Then let's see the other areas in which the Congress delivered. What were the other areas in which Congress delivered? If we see the agrarian reform, if we see the agrarian reforms, if we see agriculture in India now also and then also, mainly if you can categorize, there are two classes, one who are landlords and one who are tenants. Landlords were few in number and tenants were high in number. But the dilemma before Congress was how to balance the interest of both classes, because Congress being an umbrella organization, a supra class entity where it represented all the classes, that is multi-class organization. So Congress had the dilemma to balance both the landlord's interest as well as the peasant interest. And if we see the interest of tenants, what are the challenges before them? One is, you can write tenancy rights, the rights to be enjoyed by tenants, which include security of tenure. They should not be evicted at the whims and fancies of landlords. They should have security of tenure. Then rents to be restriction on increase of rents. Landlords should not increase the rents as per their own, because otherwise tenants will not be able to pay back. Another concern for tenants was, it is now also the problem of debt, because these days also we hear now and then that farmers are committing suicide. Why they are committing suicide? Because they take money from money lenders which is at very high interest rate and they are unable to pay. This problem was at that time also. So issue of rural indebtedness. So these were some of the challenges being faced by the tenants. And what Congress did? Congress brought tenancy legislations. Congress brought tenancy legislations in UP, Bihar, Orissa. What these legislations did? First thing is, They gave the rights to the tenant. They gave the occupancy rights to the tenant. You cannot evict a tenant who have been cultivating a field over a long period of time. So, occupancy rights to tenant. What other they did? They put a restriction on the increase of rent. You cannot increase rent just depending on your choice. You have to revise rent only after 10 years. Something like this in Uttar Pradesh. At that time it was United Provinces. So United Provinces Tenancy Act said that only after 10 years can the landlords revise the rent. So restriction on rents, rent increase. अपने मन से आप नहीं बढ़ा सकते हैं इसको. What was the other thing? Issue of rural indebtedness. So to deal with this, Congress brought legislation which regulated the business of money lending. So there were legislation like Debtors Relief Acts. There were legislations like Debtors Relief Acts. What it did? It regulated business of money lending. It regulated the business of money lending. So these were the steps which Congress had taken for agrarian reform. In addition, there is a issue which you may have read, that is the issue of Bakast land in Bihar. Issue of Bakast land in Bihar. What was this issue? This is covered in many books. See, what happened in Bihar, that there were tenants who had been cultivating certain lands for years, but when they were not able to pay the rent, they were unable to pay the arrears of the rent, landlords or zamindars evicted them, and these tenants were fighting for those lands. They were called the Bakast land. So here the main person who was fighting was Swami Sahajanand Saraswati as part of Bihar Kisan Sabha. So here also Congress said that if you pay half of the arrear, tenants are not supposed to pay all the rent arrears because of which you have been evicted. If you pay just half of the arrear, you will be given your Bakast land. So that was the issue related to Bakast land in Bihar. So this is related to agrarian reforms which were brought by the Congress ministries. The third reform were related to labor or working class reforms. As usual, what will be the issues faced by working class? If we see the issues faced by working class, one will be the issue of their wages, other will be the issue of working conditions, and other will be the issue of whether they can organize themselves into trade unions or not. So these are more or less the issues which are faced by the labor class. They are facing this now also. So if we see the wages in Bombay, a committee was set up related to textile sector, and the wages for the textile workers were increased on its recommendation. So if we see the wages in Bombay Ministry, they increased wages of textile workers. In the same way, if we see the working conditions and other things, a number of steps were taken by the Congress ministries to improve their conditions, to contribute to their welfare. But one legislation was brought by the Bombay ministry, and that was Industrial Dispute Act 1938. This legislation became a reason for controversy. Lot of controversy happened because of this. Why lot of controversy? Because this Industrial Dispute Act, it restricted the right to strike. Basically, as I told you, Congress was a multi-class organization, a multi-class movement. So as part of that, Congress tried to reconcile the two classes. इसने सोचा कि कैपिटलिस्ट और लेबर दोनों को कैसे साथ लाया जा सकते हैं. हाउ कैन वी इंश्योर गुडविल बिटवीन द टू क्लासेस, हाउ कैन वी ब्रिंग कॉन्सिलिएशन, मेडिएशन, नेगोशिएशन बिटवीन दीज क्लासेस. So this legislation was brought for that purpose, for goodwill between capitalists and labor. But problem with this legislation was it restricted right to strike. Actually, it discouraged strike by the labor classes, by the working classes. First is this. Second thing, registration of trade union became complicated. So there were two problems basically with respect to this Industrial Dispute Act. It restricted the right to strike of the workers, and at the same time the registration of trade union became complicated under this act, and because of this act was opposed. All India Trade Union Congress, communist parties, in fact Dr. B.R. Ambedkar also, all these people organized strikes, organized protest under Industrial Dispute Act. So this was a criticism of Industrial Dispute Act. In addition to that, if we see the social reform and welfare, this is labor reform. In the same way, if we see the social reform, what were the steps taken by Congress ministries for social reforms and welfare? So one is the initiative taken with respect to the depressed classes. For depressed classes, legislations were brought. Legislations for what? For temple entry. A number of temple entry legislation were brought. Then legislations were brought for their access to public places. Access to public spaces, public wells, for water, access to restaurants and hotels which were earlier not accessible to them. So a number of legislation were brought for temple entry, for access to public spaces, public wells, restaurants, hotels, all these things, to improve their conditions, to remove the disabilities, to remove basically why these legislations? To remove disabilities placed on them due to caste. So this was another step taken by the Congress. In addition to that, scholarships were also given for the depressed classes. So these can be some of the steps related to depressed classes which were taken by the Congress. In addition to that, a number of steps were also taken related to education. Like, if we take education, mass literacy campaigns, all these are coming under social sector. Mass literacy campaigns were launched. In addition to that, steps were taken related to public health and sanitation. Education, public health and sanitation, all these sectors, with respect to all these sectors, a number of steps were taken. In addition to that, support for khadi and village industries, village cottage industries were. In addition, in social sector, you can also write that prohibition of liquor, prohibition was another area, prohibition enforced in a number of places. So these were some of the steps taken by the Congress after assuming the charge of provincial ministries. ये सारे काम कांग्रेस ने किए थे. In addition to this, another step which Congress took was related to planning. National Planning Committee set up. Under Jawaharlal Nehru. National Planning Committee set up under Jawaharlal Nehru. So these are the points you can write in the works undertaken by the Congress ministries when they were in provinces. Now we will see also what were the criticism of them, what were the critical analysis of these. One, to we already saw that Industrial Dispute Act, it was criticized by everyone, but what were other things which were criticized? We will see them also. If we see the criticism of these things, as you know, in UPSC generally they ask for critical analysis, so we should know some criticism also. So let's go in this also one by one. Like if we see the tenants, or peasants, they were basically asking for radical reform, because they had supported the Congress during its mass movement. So they had a lot of expectation from the Congress. They were asking for radical reform, maybe the abolition of jamindari, maybe all the rights to be given to the tenants, maybe the removal of all the rents and revenue provisions. So Congress was finding it difficult to satisfy the demands of the tenants. Why? Because it has to balance between tenants and landlords. Landlords were also supporters of Congress. In addition, there was chance of these landlords going to the British and supporting them, and they were influential class and they had resources also. So Congress was not wanting to annoy them, and because of this, tenants were not satisfied. In addition to that, within tenants also, within peasants also there were agricultural laborer. See, if we see the hierarchy of peasants, jamindars are there, tenants are there, and below tenants are these agricultural laborers. So their concerns went unaddressed because they were not that influential. So agricultural laborers, their concerns went unaddressed. So this was another shortcoming of the Congress ministries, that agricultural laborers. In addition to that, below tenants, these tenants also used to sublet their field. So they were subtenants. They were subtenants who were below these tenants. Their concerns were also not addressed. So this can be some of the criticism related to agrarian reform. This can be some of the criticism related to agrarian reform. In addition to that, if we see the working class movement, in addition to this, if we see the working class, as I told you, this Industrial Dispute Act 1938, it showed Congress pro-business attitude, and it was criticized by Congress socialists as well as those who were outside the Congress. Good evening UPSC IS. So it was criticized by Congress socialists as well as those who were outside the Congress, this working class movement. In addition to that, if we see the Dalits, they were also not very impressed. If we see the Dalits or the untouchables or depressed classes, they were also not impressed by few legislations related to removal of caste disabilities. Related to removal of caste disabilities. So Dalits were also not happy, working class also not happy, peasants also not happy. When I am saying all these are not happy, basically we are doing a critical analysis, so we are writing some sections of these. It doesn't mean all the Dalits, all laborers, all working class people, all peasants. Some section of society, they were not happy because their expectations were quite high from the Congress, and they perceived that Congress is not able to deliver up to their expectation. That's why they were not happy. In addition to that, if we see what were the positives of this, what were the positives of Congress assuming power. So if we see, first positive is Congress emerged stronger. Congress emerged stronger. First thing is this. Second thing, British had expected that once they bring this 1935 Act, Congress will go to the provinces and it will lead to provincialization of Congress. Congress will forget center. It will shift all its attention towards provinces. But it did not happen. As I told you, Congress के पास dual responsibility थी. One was to work at the provinces, another was to prepare for the next mass movement. So it did not lead to provincialization of the Congress. Did not lead, as was expected by the British, did not lead to provincialization, because they thought that once you give them the taste of power, they will forget their main goal, that is the demand for independence. Did not lead to provincialization of Congress, because Gandhi ji ने पहले ही बोल दिया, hold lightly to power, do not hold tightly to power. These are crowns of thorns. So Congress, it did not lead to provincialization of Congress. Second thing was, the Congress used these offices for raising national consciousness. तो इन ऑफिस का भी यूज किसके लिए कांग्रेस कर रही थी? नेशनल कॉन्शियसनेस रेज करने के लिए, नेशनल मूवमेंट को बिल्ड करने के लिए. In 1942 we will have Quit India movement. So Congress was preparing the base for the next mass struggle. It had not forgotten its main goal, primary goal. What was that? To attain independence, to liberate India. So another was this. Next thing, these ICS officers, Indian Civil Service officers, they had also realized this within the 2 years of Congress rule, that the departure of British rule is just a matter of time. So it is important to remain neutral to the Congress. So that was another thing that ICS officers realized, that departure of British rule, departure of British Raj was a matter of time. And so their attitude towards Congress also changed. They were not that ruthless. They were not that, their attitude was not that brutal towards the Congress. In fact, they were becoming slightly neutral towards the Congress, but because they were realizing that Congress is going to come to power in the future. In addition to that, one more thing happened. You may have read that British always used to challenge the Indians that Indians are not capable to rule. Indians cannot rule themselves. They have to be taught how to rule. And that's why we are not leaving India. Why? Because we are teaching Indians how to rule. It shattered that myth also. The myth that Indians cannot rule were completely shattered. Why? Because Congress was successfully able to run offices for more than 2 years. So it shattered the myth. Indians cannot rule on their own. It shattered the myth that Indians cannot rule on their own. In addition to this, there was one more big positive of this. That was, we'll just see why Congress resigned. But when the Congress resigned from the ministries, it became very clear to everybody that Congress was not there out to grab power, but it was there to build national consciousness. It was not clinging to power, it was not sticking to power. When the time came, it renounced all powers, it resigned from the offices. So it also proved the detractors of Congress wrong, that they are there to grab power. यही तो बोला जाता था कि कांग्रेस ऑफिस ले रही है, वो पावर के पीछे भाग रही है. वो पावर के पीछे नहीं भाग रही है. इसके रेजिग्नेशन ने ये प्रूव कर दिया. द रेजिग्नेशन ऑफ द कांग्रेस मिनिस्ट्रीज. तो रेजिग्नेशन, विल सी रेजिग्नेशन अभी देखेंगे. रेजिग्नेशन प्रूव्ड दैट कांग्रेस not there to seek power. कांग्रेस पावर के पीछे नहीं भाग रही थी. So these were some of the positives of this. Congress was not there for the power, rather for the emancipation of people from the foreign rule. तो ये तो इसका हो गया पॉजिटिव. चलिए नेक्स्ट पे चलते हैं. यस, यूपीएससी आईएएस, आप ठीक कह रहे हैं. सो नाउ लेट्स गो टू द नेक्स्ट थिंग, दैट इज द रेजिग्नेशन. तो व्हाई रेजिग्नेशन ऑफ कांग्रेस मिनिस्ट्रीज? व्हाई रेजिग्नेशन ऑफ कांग्रेस मिनिस्ट्रीज? What happened that in 1939 September, in September 1939, Nazi Germany under Hitler attacked Poland, and when the Germany attacked Poland, France and Britain declared war on Germany. When France and Britain declared war on Germany, the Viceroy of India, Lord Linlithgow, also declared the inclusion of government of India from the side of Britain and France and against the Nazi Germany. Without consulting Indian opinion, without seeking the opinion of Congress or the provincial ministries, Lord Linlithgow on his own declared India's participation in the World War II from the side of Britain and France. So this was the context. So September this, Germany attack on Poland, and because of this, Britain and France declared war on Germany, and under this, Viceroy included India from Britain side So this was the larger context against which all these development took place. Now, what was the problem? Problem was within Congress there were a number of opinions. If you ask Gandhi, Gandhi became emotional. He was very sympathetic towards the cause of Britain. Why? Because he said fascist aggression has to be stopped. You have to differentiate between Britain and France and Nazi Germany. One is fascist, other is democratic. So we should support Britain. That was the initial reaction of Gandhiji. But within Congress, another group led by Subhash Chandra Bose was not ready to negotiate with Britain. Subhash Chandra Bose was very clear, whether it is Germany or Britain, both are imperialist powers, both are fighting for their colonial possessions. So we should not side with anybody, rather we should take advantage of this to liberate India. We should take advantage of this situation to liberate India. So under such conditions, within Congress itself, there were division of opinions. There was not consensus, but slowly a consensus was formed in Congress Working Committee. Congress Working Committee had a meeting in which a consensus was reached. And what was the consensus? Consensus was that okay, we'll support the war efforts of Britain, but only on two conditions. Only if two conditions are met. Only if two conditions are met, we will support the war efforts of the Britain. What were those conditions? First condition was independence pledge after the war. Once the war is finished, Britain should give India independence. So one was, it was asking for independence pledge for after the war, that is post-war independence pledge. That was the first condition. Second condition was formation of a sort of central government. Formation of a sort of central government, national government at center, an immediate national government at center, which will have inclusion from Congress also to coordinate all these efforts. So first was post-war independence pledge, second was immediate national government at center. But the Viceroy Linlithgow was not in a mood to listen to the Congress conditions. They were not ready to negotiate, they were not ready to talk to the Congress. And when this happened, Congress resigned. When this happened, Congress resigned. So in October 1939, Congress resigned from Ministries and started preparing for the next phase of revolt, next phase of mass movement. Since this was just the beginning of the war, they were not in a condition to launch these movements, so they started preparation for the next mass movement. Congress Ministries resigned. So this was the background. And who was the person who was the most happy after this? Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He celebrated Day of Deliverance on 22nd December 1939 due to resignation of Congress Ministries. So on 22nd December 1939, what was celebrated? Day of Deliverance. Day of Deliverance by Muslim League. By Muslim League. They celebrated, Muslim League and Jinnah celebrated 22nd December 1939 as the Day of Deliverance. So I think that's all. In today's lecture, we have discussed about the Congress ministries, we have discussed their workings, we have discussed their shortcomings, and we have also discussed their resignation. So from election till resignation, we have covered everything related to Congress ministries. In next class, we'll talk about the other things, other developments. If you guys have any question, any query, anything you were unable to understand, please feel free to ask. कुछ भी नहीं समझ में आया तो पूछ लीजिए. I think no one is having any issue, any doubt. So that's all from. Okay, Jamshed, I will tell. मैं आपको बता दूंगा. अभी this is not the forum. मैं आपको बता दूंगा about this. Don't worry. So that's all in today's lecture. Thank you everybody, and I wish you a happy Diwali from Tathastu family. Enjoy the weekend, enjoy Diwali, enjoy the festivities. Thank you.